Hello YouTube, my name is Giga, and in this video I'm going to try to find out if I can beat Pokemon Sword without taking any damage. Pokemon Challenge runs have seen a huge spike in popularity, and recently, damageless runs have become a thing, and I wanted to try my hand at one. I'll be playing on Sword version, primarily because I own it, and because of some relevant points that I'll explain later in the run. So what exactly is a damageless run? It basically means none of my Pokemon can lose any health for any reason at all, either through getting hit, weather, life orb, recoil, etc. I'm also not going to be using any sort of glitches or exploits during this run, which includes watt farming. Also, I'm going to be allowed to save. I wanted to do this for fun and just see if it was possible, and I felt like forcing myself to retry a bunch of tedious steps for no reason wasn't really worth it. Anyway, the goal is to not only become the champion, but also beat the post-game as well. I chose Scorbunny as my starter, strictly because of the fact that it's super effective against the first gym. We're pretty limited early on in terms of Pokemon available, and I wanted to ensure I could at least get through the first gym without any sort of major issue. Well, immediately, on our very first battle, we faced our first major hurdle. Wooloo. Not just any Wooloo, Hop's Wooloo. It only knows Tackle, and we can't one-shot it, even with a critical hit. Tackle also has 100% accuracy in this generation, meaning the run is essentially over. That would be a pretty boring video, and a pretty awful challenge. Knowing that there's literally nothing that I can do about this, I just decided to accept that I would have to get hit during this one time, but never again. Grookey was also a problem. I couldn't one-shot it with Ember, even with a crit, and it would always use Tackle first. I knew it had Growl, but after an hour and a half, it never used Growl once. I got kind of desperate and decided to see if maybe Hop was auto-programmed not to beat us, so I got Scorbunny down to real low health from Wooloo and got ready for Grookey. While Grookey still used Tackle, my Ember did a lot more than usual. That's when it hit me. Blaze. Blaze is an ability that when a Pokemon's health is below 1/3, the power of Fire-type moves increases. Definitely not something I expected to need to use in a damageless run. But since I was already taking damage from Wooloo, what was a couple extra points? However, Blaze wasn't enough on its own. I would also need a critical hit. Finally, 2 more hours later, I got a crit with Ember and defeated Hop in the first battle of the game. Optimistic was not a word that came to mind when thinking of the rest of this challenge. But I still managed to beat Hop, and that's all I really cared about. I had to focus on the journey ahead because there were definitely a lot more challenges coming. The challenges just kept coming. Despite being level 7, Scorbunny still couldn't even one-shot a level 2 Squovet. I could one-shot some various level 2 or 3 bug Pokemon on the first route, but this method is pretty inconsistent because of the fact that they only appear in random encounters. Every Pokemon knows an attacking move at this point, so it's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Except this generation has the feature that catching Pokemon gets you experience. Catching Pokemon was a much safer method to gaining experience, and it also helped that Leon gave you a bunch of Pokeballs right before Route 2. The plan was to catch as many high-level Pokemon as possible to gain experience. I also made sure to get a Yamper and Rookity along the way, as they would be useful later. The strategy for this route was basically to catch as many high-level Pokemon as I could to gain a bunch of experience. After that, I would start one-shotting them at a high enough level, particularly after level 12 where I learned Double Kick. I also made sure to grab a Yamper and a Rookity, as they would be relevant later. Finally, I took on Hop at the end of Route 2. I was definitely a little scared going into the battle, and for some reason was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to one-shot his Pokemon, even though I had a Reboot and was level 16, and had already ran all the damage calcs ahead of time. But I was able to do it, and thank goodness, because now the run could really start, as so much more of the game had opened up, and so much more strategy and interesting things could be involved rather than just grinding on weak level Pokemon. Having access to the wild area meant I could fight higher level Pokemon and gain a lot more experience. I needed to be at least level 24 in order to beat the first gym leader. Along with grinding, I also made sure to do as many raid battles as I could. One of the rewards for raids, regardless of what level they are, is rare candies, and I needed to farm as many of those as I could because there was going to be some serious grinding that I needed to do later in the game, and anything I could do ahead of time to make that easier was something that I wanted to do. Also, I had overplanned and didn't realize that Leon gave you a charcoal before you take on the first gym leader, therefore making all of the grinding I did slightly unnecessary because I didn't need to be nearly as high a level in order to beat the first gym. But hey, better to be overprepared than underprepared, right? Especially in a run like this. Before I got to Milo, there were a couple other story battles that came up. There was the first battle with Team Yell, another battle with Hop, and the introductory battle with Bede. However, Raboot was so overleveled by this point, none of those battles really even mattered. Even the battle against Milo wasn't that impressive. I just swept his whole team. And in all honesty, that's kind of what a lot of these battles are going to go like. It's just me obviously having to sweep. Especially in the early game, there's not really a lot of strategy, and not really much that I can say. Even right now, I'm kind of just filling for time, because this battle takes so long, and I don't have anything to say about it. There's going to be some more interesting strategy later, where it involves switching around and using items in a particular way, but early on I kind of was a little loose with my calculations, and forgot things like the sun would be up because of how Dynamax moves work, and also the fact that I was getting a charcoal. With the first gym defeated, I started preparing for Nessa. I would need Bolthound at least at level 30 if I wanted to be able to defeat her safely. I also took the time to catch a Magikarp. Gyarados would be really helpful for the third gym, and I wanted to make sure I had adequate time to train it in advance. Immediately after catching Magikarp, I decided to take on the battle with Hop. This battle really isn't anything particularly interesting, but I did want to use this time to mention an important difference between this version of the game and some of the prior versions for Damageless runs. In this version, the daycare doesn't actually grant you any experience points. That means any sort of grinding that I need to do in order to progress through the game, I have to do myself in a pretty risky situation in most cases, and can't really cheat through it by just leaving something in the daycare and leveling up that way. It does make it a little bit more interesting where I at least get to do battles instead of just like biking back and forth for several hours, but I did want to point it out because this is a major challenge that I did face, because there are going to be a lot of pretty intense grinding sessions, especially later on in the game, and not having access to a daycare made it just that much more difficult. And yeah, I'm still kind of just stalling for time to get through this Hop battle because it's just that long. Honestly, at this rate, I might just start like telling really bad jokes during some of these battles, because that's really the only way I can see myself commentating through all of them at a reasonable speed. During the grind to get Bolthound high enough to beat Nessa, we finally had Magikarp evolve into Gyarados. Finally, it's time for Nessa. Once again, the battle really isn't that interesting, and the only thing worth noting is that her Aeroscuda does know Aqua Jet. This means that I did have to restart once or twice in order to get a run where she didn't use it. This also highlights a problem that's going to show up a lot more later in the run, and that's the amount of priority moves that Pokemon in this game use. I did want to give myself the option to restart if need be, but I didn't really want to make it one where it was all about luck, and it was me just restarting until I got good RNG. So I did account for that later, and didn't try and take advantage of the fact that I could keep restarting. But yeah, other than that, there really isn't anything that I can say about Nessa, and once again, I'm kind of stalling for time. I did look up some Pokemon jokes, but most of the ones I found are really bad. And I don't really want to tell them, because this video is already awkward enough, as you can see from my incessant rambling, and lack of good commentary, and bad audio quality, and probably bad video editing skills too. I mean, I still have some amount of seconds to go before I can talk about something interesting, and I don't really know what to say, and we're just going to kind of all waste time together. After a particularly uninteresting battle with Bede, where Gyarados swept through his whole team with Bite, I ran into another major problem: tag team battles. I had to battle alongside Hop to beat a bunch of Team Yell grunts, and most of them knew priority moves. Remember how I literally just said I wasn't going to rely on luck in order to beat some of these battles and wanted to do it through skill? Yeah, that was a lie. In order to be able to realistically beat this battle without any sort of luck, I would need to get Raboot up to level 70. And I wasn't about to do that quite yet. I was totally fine rolling the dice and retrying the battle a couple times, because I didn't really want to grind this early in the game for that much, for such a little turnout. Luckily, it only took about 3 or 4 tries before I was able to beat this battle without taking damage. It was really nice to know that at least with my first double battle with Hop, that things weren't super terrible, and I didn't have to restart like 20 times. It also made comfort in the fact that the Pokemon moves aren't always going to be the same every time, and sometimes you can get a little bit lucky. After a fairly uneventful introductory battle with Marnie, and while training Gyarados up for Kabu, I decided to take a quick break to go catch a Growlithe, and then I immediately evolved it into Arcanine. Arcanine, because it knows Extreme Speed, was definitely going to be fairly pivotal in the rest of the run, and it would need to be fairly trained up, so it made sense to get ahead and train as much of it as possible now, so I wouldn't have to do it later on. Worth mentioning now is while there is no daycare system in Sword and Shield, any battle that you partake in, all of your Pokemon in your party gain experience. Also, the amount of experience isn't reduced by the number of Pokemon in your party. This is something I didn't really realize at first, and I thought if I had less members in my party, the experience would be more, but that's not actually the case. I decided the best course of action to deal with the fake-out users was to catch a Ghastly. Ghastly and Haunter are Ghost type, which means that they're immune to both normal and fighting type moves, which makes up a majority of the priority moves in this game. Also, Haunter has really good special attack and speed, which I think is going to be pretty critical for the rest of the run. To make my life a little bit easier, I decided to EV train Haunter in special attack. That way, I wouldn't have to grind up quite as many levels. Also, it kind of made grinding a little bit more interesting. During this whole process, I finally got Raboot to evolve into Cinderace. Having access to its double kick was definitely something I would need. After EV training enough and getting my special attack to the point where Damage Calc said I had no issues, I decided to take on the gym and take on Kabu once again. Only for me to realize that even though I had done everything correctly according to the damage calculator, I still couldn't one-shot his Ninetales, which was a terrifying thought to think about. After several moments of self-loathing and grinding way above the necessary amount, I was finally ready to take on Kabu again. I wasn't still sure about what had gone wrong with the damage calculations, but what I think is this. I know that for earlier generations, any Pokemon that a trainer had, all of their IVs were set to 0, and I did all the calculations based on this. But given the fact that it didn't work this time around, I'm kind of just assuming that they all have perfect IVs. Obviously, I don't really know how to prove this, and I was too lazy to look it up, so this is the method that I was going with. In terms of the actual battle itself, it was slightly more interesting because of the fact that I used Haunter for Ninetales and then Gyarados for everything else. But once again, it's a straight sweep. And the fact that water moves are automatically boosted because they get Rain Dance essentially after using it for the first time really helped. Gyarados had already been trained up to beat Kabu before I even caught Ghastly, so I had no doubt in my mind that it was going to be able to handle Kabu with the utmost of ease. I'm also still stalling for time. These battles are already timed to speed, and even then there's still so much space in between. I'm speaking as slowly as I possibly can while not just like sounding monotonous and boring, and it's kind of just really hard to come up with things to say. There really isn't strategy for any of the gyms. Like I've already said, it's just one-shot everything, and if you can't with one Pokemon, use another. One thing that's new to Pokemon Sword and Shield is different gym leaders depending on the version of the game you're playing. Because I'm playing in Sword, the gym leader I'm going to face next is B, which is pretty great for me. All of her Pokemon are fighting type, which is something that I've been preparing for, and something that I'm definitely looking forward to facing. Alistair is Shield's exclusive gym leader, and one thing that makes Alistair really scary is a Mimikyu that has Shadow Sneak. That means you're basically risking from the start that you're going to get hit with priority because you don't really have a good way of hitting it back. Not to mention you have to use at least a multi-hit move or hope to get 2 hits in, which isn't making your case any easier. I took some time to nickname my Pokemon. My original plan for B was just to have Corvic Knight sweep through her whole team. The problem being most of her gym has users with priority moves. And it wasn't just Mach Punch and Quick Attack, or Fake Out. They also had Bullet Punch, which means that I couldn't just use Haunter like I had done in the last gym. Pretty much, I would need Arcanine to sweep the whole gym. What was particularly scary was her level 34 Pangaroo with a priority move. In order to be able to comfortably one-shot that, I would need to be level 63 with max attack and holding a silk scarf. So that's just what I did. I started grinding on excadrills and leveling up as much as possible and guaranteeing that even if these damage calcs were a little bit rough, I was going to be able to one-shot her entire team. This meant that Arcanine was essentially becoming the MVP of the team, being able to handle a lot more than I had originally planned, and it also means Corvic Knight was useless. I ended up taking B on a little earlier than expected, mainly because my attack stat matched what the damage calculator said I needed in order to win. Before I got to her gym, there were two particularly interesting battles. One was against a painter who had a Sudowoodo with Sucker Punch. Sudowoodo also has Sturdy, and I only won the battle because I got lucky with a flinch, and he never actually used Focus Punch. There was also a pretty cool battle with Hop as well, which involved a lot of switching and was pretty interesting. However, the battle was pretty long in terms of recording, and I didn't really have enough to say about it in order to justify having it in the video. Even right now, I'm using B's battle as a way to backfill and explain things that happened along the way that can't really make the video cut. Her gym was actually pretty cool. Because of the fact that I had to know when to use Extreme Speed or when to use Flame Wheel, I had to do a lot of planning in advance. But overall, the battle with B was pretty straightforward as well. I got really lucky in the fact that she sent out Sirfetch'd last, which meant that Arcanine could Dynamax and use Max Flare to get a Sunny Day boost against her Machamp. That isn't guaranteed, and I need to make sure that I'm not Dynamaxed for her Pangaroo because of the fact that it knows Bullet Punch, and I would need to be able to hit it first. Beating B meant that I was halfway done with the gym challenge, which is pretty funny because most of my team was in the 50s by this point, but also meant there was a lot of game left ahead for me to conquer. Nothing of particular interest happened between the 4th and 5th gym. Even the 5th gym itself wasn't that interesting, where all of the questions were pretty direct, and there weren't any problems along the way. I didn't even really consider prepping for this gym battle. I figured that there were no priority moves, and Arcanine was at such a high level that I could take everything out with no problem. This theory turned out to be correct, and Arcanine was able to sweep through the gym no problem, which was great, and it made me feel better knowing that all of my EV training and leveling up was slightly worth it. This was the last gym battle before I could introduce the last member of my team, and in what my mind was the most important member. But I still had to get through this and pick up a couple items before I could make that true. Once again, we're at the point where I'm stuck narrating a battle that I don't really want to talk about. There's still a bunch of time left, and I've already really covered every important issue, and I'm still rambling. I know that in later parts of the run, where just winning a couple battles really easily, I'm probably going to find some fun, uncopyright music that I can just stick and play over things like people used to do back in the day, but we're not really at that point because it's 20 more seconds and it's really just rambling. And while this run was challenging and fun and it was a blast and I definitely would do it again, there are a lot of moments like this where it's just really awkward to talk about and there's nothing to say because there is no strategy. You're clicking the same button and you've already guaranteed that you're not going to die, and you don't. But, with that, we basically have beaten the 5th gym and can move on. After a little trekking, I was finally at the turning point of the run. Kinda. It took about 10 hours, but now I was finally at the real turning point of the run. I finally caught a Darumaka that was brave and had fairly good attack IVs. All of this will be relevant later. This is another important difference between Sword and Shield, as Darumaka is a Sword exclusive, and I honestly don't think the run would be possible without it. After a super cool nickname, shoving all of the candies I'd accumulated from raids, and maxing out its special attack, Darmanitan was ready for the first gym. I was overconfident and felt like Ice Punch was going to sweep the whole way through. Well, that plan really didn't work out, as we can immediately see. Sadly, while Darmanitan is an absolute beast, it wasn't quite ready to sweep the rest of the game. So I decided that sometimes you do need a little help from your friends, and I couldn't have Darmanitan sweep through everything. Ice Punch couldn't one-shot Barbarnacle, but Superpower could. And it just so happened the rest of Gordy's team was incredibly weak to Water-type moves, and I happened to have a Water-type Pokemon in the form of Gyarados. I had originally figured that by the time I got Darmanitan, It was going to basically be able to clean sweep the rest of the game. And the only time I would need another Pokemon was because of a priority move. So it was good to see that Gyarados was still able to put in some work, at least for this one battle. I also had to remind myself that Darmanitan was going to get to level 100 at some point, and it also didn't have an item at this point. So it more than made sense that, yes, there were still going to be Pokemon that it wasn't going to be able to one-shot. Also, apologies on some of the video at this point. I can see it's a little choppy, and I've tried adjusting my video settings, and I think that issue is just coming from my capture card. I bought a fairly cheap one, primarily to do this run and record it, and I can see now that it wasn't really the best choice in terms of that for a video, but it did get the job done, and I'm thankful for that, and I'm thankful for being able to still do this challenge even on such a minimal budget. And I hope that the lack of quality of my production value doesn't really take away from the quality of the video and the challenge itself, because that did take a lot, and I had to figure out a lot and put in a bunch of effort. So even with this mediocre camera quality and audio recording and me not really knowing what to say, I hope that at least knowing what this experience was like and seeing all the major battles has made it somewhat interesting and a cool ride, because it was cool for me, and it definitely has made me want to try other damageless runs at later times in my life. But here I am jumping ahead to my battle with Piers. Before getting here, I had a quick battle with Hop, where Darmanitan had to sweep through everything because of the fact that there was Hail Out. I also grabbed the Choice Band before taking on Piers, because that item would be pivotal. As we can see, I had to do a lot of switching. A lot of his team has priority and weird different types of moves, so it wasn't just about using Darmanitan. But once again, I hadn't planned things all the way through, and Darmanitan wasn't able to one-shot his Obstagoon, which meant that I was going to have to do some grinding. Despite having just spent a bunch of time grinding and 10 hours to catch a Darumaka and wanting to put it off, there was just no way with this battle of Piers ahead. But if I was going to grind, I figure at this point it made sense to grind all the way, because I would have to do it at absolutely some point. After several hours of grinding and shoveling all of the rare candies I had into Darmanitan, my Darmanitan was level 100 and most of my team was in the high 70s. That was it. The last major grind I would ever have to do in the run. Everything else from here was going to be smooth sailing. Now I had nothing to worry about Piers. It was great. I was able to one-shot the gym without even caring about it, and now here I was, back at Piers. Just like I expected, Scrafty went down immediately, and Darmanitan was able to one-shot Obstagoon. And then there was Skuntank. I knew it had Sucker Punch, and I knew I was going to have to use Arcanine to extreme speed it and one-shot it, which is why I'd given it the Choice Band in the first place. But the big thing that I had not accounted for was the fact that Skuntank had Aftermath. So even though I was able to one-shot it and not have to worry about the Sucker Punch, after everything I just went through, there was a roadblock I couldn't beat, and I was stuck. And I, honest to goodness, had no idea what I was going to do to overcome beating the Skuntank and finally beating Piers. My first thought was to go for Vacuum Wave. It's the only special priority move and my only chance of getting around Aftermath. But even a level 100 modest Lucario with max special attack could not one-hit KO Skuntank with Vacuum Wave. I didn't really know what to do. I thought about it for a while, and then I remembered, yes, Sucker Punch is a priority move, but it'll only hit me if I'm using an attacking move. That meant I could use a non-attacking move the turn Skuntank went for Sucker Punch, and hopefully guarantee that it wouldn't use Sucker Punch on the turn that I attacked. I could also get rid of that hopeful part by using either Disable or Torment. I decided to go with Torment, mainly because Salazzle was the best choice. Salazzle would be able to one-shot with Flamethrower, which meant that I didn't have to worry about Aftermath. So that's what I did. After saying I would never have to grind again in this game, I grinded some more. I had left too much to chance for Piers, and this time no more. I had already battled him like 5 times, and as much as he's one of my favorite trainers in the game, I really, really, really wanted to progress and like finally move on and do something interesting. Ironically, he didn't even go for Sucker Punch the first time around, making this whole thing useless, but it worked out in the end, and that's all I care about. After a giant explosion where the entire Galar region started questioning how good an idea it was to let Pokemon become gigantic all the time, it was time for a battle with Raihan. I think my favorite thing about him is the fact that he's always texting, and it's Game Freak's kind of way of acknowledging that its entire fan base is pretty much millennials. I also really like the fact that his battle focuses on using the weather and is a doubles battle. It's a fresh take from what we normally see, and also is really the only reason that this run was possible. Because of the fact that I'm allowed to use two Pokemon, I can have Darmanitan be a heavy hitter and Gyarados Dynamax to change the weather. Because of the fact that both of his weather setters are weak to water, I didn't really have to worry about risking any damage calcs with Gyarados, and I could easily one-shot them and get weather to protect my team from going down. That being said, if it had been a singles battle, I would have just Dynamaxed with Darmanitan from the start and Ice Punched and not really worried about the weather, but it was cool to see this difference in mechanics and adjust my strategy accordingly. It also meant that Darmanitan wasn't the sole all-star of this run, and that I could keep exploring using different Pokemon and making sure that my team had made sense. And then it also helped justify a lot of the choices that I had made earlier on that I was unsure about. Overall, I was happy, and I was done with the last gym leader, which meant that it was time for the Championship Cup and preparation for the post-game. I finally made it, the Championship Cup, and the last major hurdle of the main storyline. The problem is, as has always been the case, I don't have anything to say, and these battles are so long. The strategy at this point is just the same for every single battle. It's, if they have a normal type priority move, then I use Haunter. If they have Sucker Punch, I use Arcanine. If they have anything else, it's pretty much Darmanitan, unless there's something that I can hit super effectively. The switches are just to make my life a little bit easier because I didn't run all the damage calcs, and I'm sure in a lot of cases they're actually unnecessary. At this point, I'm just going to start talking about anecdotes about my life, because there really isn't anything to say about the challenge until I get to the very end, and I honestly have nothing to say, because there is no commentary. There's nothing interesting happening. It's the same Pokemon following the same roles, and I have nothing to fear at this point. At least for right now. There is going to be like one more interesting section in the main game, but we got to get a little ways through some stuff before that happens. So yeah, a little bit about my Pokemon background, I guess. I started playing during Gold, Silver, Crystal. My first game was Gold. Then I kind of backtracked a little bit to play Yellow, and then proceeded with all the generations. When Diamond, Pearl, Platinum came out, I started getting really into competitive battling because of the fact that now you could use Wi-Fi, and all of my friends really sucked, and it kind of got boring just 6-0ing them all the time. And that's kind of where I made a bunch of friends for a while. I had a YouTube channel back then when everyone was kind of doing it, and low budget like what I'm doing now was totally the norm, and not everything had to be super high quality. And then some kids from my high school found out and like bullied me, so I stopped, which really sucks because I wish I'd kept it up, and it kind of took a while for me to get back into competitive, and here I am now doing it once again. Here we are at Hop. This battle, I guess, is slightly more interesting. I'm using Arcanine a lot more because for some reason I was afraid of Dubwool's Fluffy ability and thought that Flamethrower was just a guarantee instead of just running through with Darmanitan, who is choice banded. But anyway, besides that, I guess, yeah, the cool thing that I start doing here and use a lot more later in the run is Arcanine essentially becomes a pivot for Darmanitan, where because of the fact that Darmanitan is essentially double choiced, I have to be able to switch out to use different moves, and Arcanine really lets me do that. It also handles the fact that I can use Superpower with Darmanitan and then be able to keep attacking without fearing the attack drop. But other than that, this fight's not that interesting. I don't really like Hop as a rival. I actually think he's kind of boring, which is frustrating because he's such a pivotal part of this game and the storyline, and I spend a lot of time with him, and I think he's just the least interesting of the rivals. I think the rival from Gold, Silver, Crystal was the best out of all of them. His story was super cool, super interesting, and I like the fact that you're not friends and he just like kind of hates you and you have to deal with that and navigate that. Also, wait, I totally got way ahead of myself. Hop is not the worst rival of all time. That is definitely, without a question, Wally. I'm so sorry that I forgot that he exists, and I know that some people like him for some reason, but I just think he's just not an interesting rival and really offers nothing towards the progression of the story. As much as I don't like Hop, he does contribute a lot to the story, and I think how they played him in and what they chose to do with him this time around was really interesting, and I feel like no other rival really was able to contribute that much, at least not originally. I know there was the whole secondary side quest in Heart Gold Soul Silver with your rival, but like that is kind of different. And yeah, I'm still rambling because things are about to get more interesting. But first, I gotta finish talking through this battle, and we've kind of made it to the end. So go team! Now is our first of many random breaks from the Championship Cup, where Hop and I decide to invade a building to speed up a meeting so we can get back to fighting. Yeah, I was definitely a little unsure of why this whole thing takes place, but nevertheless, here we are. I skipped ahead to the fight with Oleana because the elevator ride up is a partner battle with Hop the whole way up, and it's just brutal. I honestly had to retry that section so many times because I just couldn't control Hop's Pokemon, and I didn't have a move that could knock out everything at once. And there really wasn't a good option to get that. But I did it. I made it. And here we are at the main battle with Oleana. And not gonna lie, like, I do feel really bad for her. She's trying just so hard to defend the chairman. And just like, especially after seeing the Pokemon episode with her, I feel bad. I feel kind of icky about this battle, which is weird because it's a game and I'm also just kind of rambling. But I mean, it's the same thing. I'm using Darmanitan as a powerhouse, and sometimes I'm switching it up for some super effective moves just to feel like I'm doing something interesting. But yeah, I mean, I don't really know what else to say. It was kind of cool. I like the fact that you can Dynamax on the top floor. I wish like that was a really nice touch, and I wish we kind of had talked a little bit more about what this building is in relationship to the power plant and why like we need to be able to Dynamax in here, and just that whole thing, and just a lot of the story kind of felt really awkward and fell apart here in my opinion, and especially also the post-game story. That whole thing was also really weird, and just like I don't really understand the logic behind it, and I'm stalling. Can't we see? After suffering no legal repercussions for breaking into arguably the most important building in Galar, and doing some grinding, which we'll talk a little bit about more later, we're back to the Championship Cup. And this time we're facing a surprise guest, known as Bede. Bede decided, hey, I'm just gonna break in and do my thing. And I said, hey, that's cool with me. This battle was also pretty straightforward. The only main difference is I decided not to use Darmanitan for it. And the reason for that is I could just do an equal or better job with Haunter. Haunter has max ooze, which is super effective against all of his Pokemon, and it boosts special attack, so I didn't even have to worry about losing. It also meant the rest of my team gained some experience. I didn't really know, and I pretty much doubted they would need it by this point, but it didn't hurt to make sure that they were gaining some levels and not being left too far behind in the event that some serious battle came up. I also do like how much Bede's personality has changed as a result of being with Miss Opal for so long, and you can really see how he's no longer the same serious, aggressive person he was at the beginning. And when he loses the battle, it shows a lot of growth and character development that you don't really see in the other Pokemon games. And I like the fact that so many characters throughout this game have developed personalities in so many ways. Can you also see that I don't really have a script to work with at this point? So I'm totally just rambling about any and everything I can. But yeah, honestly, I don't have anything to say, and the battle is wrapping up, and we can move on next to Nessa. Nessa is the reason that I had to step away for a while to do some grinding. Her first Pokemon up, as you can see, is Golisopod, and Golisopod knows first impressions. My first plan was to train up Arcanine high enough that extreme speed would outspeed and knock out Golisopod before it could use First Impression. Then I realized the fact that I pretty much would have to be level 100, and even then it wasn't a guarantee. That wasn't really a strategy I wanted to go with, so I started looking at other options like I always do. Only then did I remember that it works similar to Sucker Punch, in and of the fact that it can only hit the first turn. So, I could just protect the first turn, which is what I did, and then strike back with Flamethrower on the second. Flamethrower was already a guaranteed one-shot, and I just had done some extra grinding, and there was no point in going back at this point. Other than that, I decided to use Bolthound once again instead of Darmanitan because of the fact that it was just going to get so many boosts throughout the battle. It was going to get the electric terrain boost after Dynamaxing, and she has a Pelipper, which automatically causes Drizzle and Rain, which was going to boost it even further. So like I said, once again, a great way to sort of balance out the rest of my team and get experience, and also show off some of my other Pokemon. It wouldn't have been as interesting a run if it just became Darmanitan and occasional friend once in a while. It's showing that there are other Pokemon that are feasible for this run and can do a lot of things and really contribute and play a bigger part in how everything plays out. It could also play into the fact about how easy these games are. I know a lot of people keep bringing that up, that Sword and Shield is nowhere near as difficult as any of the earlier games. And while definitely true, I think it does still pose its own set of challenges, and this run, in my opinion, really highlighted that. But this rant for the Nessa portion of this run is over, so prepare for the next part as we move on to the next challenger, who just so happens to be B. Continuing the boss rush, we have B, who originally was a huge problem early on in the game because of the fact that so much of her team had priority moves. Well, this time is a little bit different. Nothing on her team has any sort of priority moves, so it's just a straight up Darmanitan sweep. It's just Ice Punch, Ice Punch, Ice Punch, until I get to the last three Pokemon where I'm going to Dynamax and then Max Hailstorm until everything is deader than it already was. Darmanitan is just an absolute truck, and I knew my plan going into this run was to utilize it as much as I could, but I had no idea just how strong it was. And even early on, when I was using it in the game, I kind of was afraid when I didn't need to be. And you'll see later on that I stopped really caring and just figured Darmanitan could one-shot everything, regardless of what it was, and kind of would use moves haphazardly just to see what happened. Because I wasn't really afraid of anything, especially when it had a choice band on it, where it was just doing absurd amounts of damage to just every Pokemon in the game without even thinking about what was going to happen. I know that Shield has Dragovich with Vicious Rend, which is pretty comparable in terms of power to Darmanitan, but I think the fact that Darmanitan has just such better coverage, particularly in ice moves, that Dragovich does not, means that there's no question that doing it on Sword is probably your best bet and significantly easier. And I think that doing it on Shield, because of the fact that you don't have it, would make the run just way more difficult. The start of the battle with Raihan immediately shows my sentiment of the idea of not caring, where the fact that I know very well that Ice Punch is not very effective against Torkoal, but I don't even care. I figure it's just strong enough to one-shot it, and I'm right, which is great. And then I immediately proceed to switch out to Haunter to take on this Turtonator, because I know it has Shell Trap, and I know that's supposed to do damage if you hit it with a physical move. When I took on Raihan during his gym challenge, that wasn't the case, and I was able to get through unscathed, as you saw earlier, but I wasn't sure if that was just a glitch that had happened, and I didn't really want to test it. Maybe I just don't understand how the move works, which I don't understand a lot about this game, as should be obvious, but I didn't want to chance it a second time, especially when I knew I had such an easy one-shot. So I switched in Haunter, played it safe, and now we're back to Darmanitan just running through everything with its big, powerful Ice Punch with a choice band on it for unnecessary redundancy in such an easy battle. Originally, when I set out to take on this challenge, I thought beating the game Damageless was going to be the hard part. But nope, I was totally wrong. The actual hard part is trying to edit this video, because in so many battles, just like this one here, there is so much time where all I can do is kind of add filler, because I can't really afford to cut it, and I've already sped it up so fast that I don't think it will be reasonable to do it any faster. And I don't know. I'm making weird sound effects. We're at that point. We're all in this together. I am saying a lot. I don't, like, this is so, I feel like such a small child just rambling on and on about nothing, trying to kill time. But that really is what this feels like. There's about to be a break after this battle where I can say some more interesting stuff. So I'm just trying to push really, really, really hard to get there. And I'm filling these gaps with just, God, I'm so bad at this. No one is ever going to watch any of these videos again. And I'm sorry if you've made it this far, and I'm sorry if you keep going. Thankfully, with Raihan defeated, instead of rambling about random things, I can ramble about the plot for a little bit. The Championship Cup gets interrupted for a second time, and once again, we have to leave to somehow go save the world. I like how we decide to take a quick detour to the Slumbering Weald to go get the rusted sword and shield, knowing that they're going to be important. It's just kind of funny to me how these things play out. And then we go back to the power plant ready to save the day, but first we have to defeat Chairman Rose in this super easy battle where Arcanine is just going to do all the work because his team is incredibly weak to fire type moves. They all have bad special defense, and I just so happen to have a very strong fire type Pokemon with a special attack known as Flamethrower. Also, from the looks of the power plant, it seems like they just kind of kept Eternatus hidden underground and exploited its energy in order to fuel the Dynamax capabilities of the Galar region. Which reminds me very much of the story of X and Y in certain ways, but once again, I digress and am rambling again. But yeah, the battle with Chairman Rose, super easy. I feel like for where it was in the game, it should have been a lot harder, and they kind of just made him unnecessary easy. I get that he's not a trainer and he just has these Pokemon in case he needs them, but so much is leading up to this encounter. So much is leading up to this moment where he's the main antagonist for the main story anyway, and they just give you this very lackluster and straightforward fight, which almost just feels like he should have been a gym leader, but he wasn't. But whatever. I defeated him, and now I can move on to talk about what is arguably my favorite part of the whole run. Remember earlier when I talked about how Darmanitan needed to be brave and have at least 20 attack IVs? Yeah, well, it was for this moment, for this battle with Eternatus. I originally didn't know if the run was possible because of this battle, and started playing around with every sort of possibility in order to beat it. My original thinking was, hey, maybe I can switch around, maybe I can use Pokemon that can avoid most of its moves and try and ride it out. And then I realized, why not just go for a one-shot? I knew it theoretically could be done. I had seen it done with another Eternatus, but I didn't know if it was possible within the scope of the rules. After playing around with some damage calcs, I saw that yes, it was possible with Darmanitan. It was just a little bit tricky. It wasn't enough to be level 100 with a positive nature, max attack, holding a choice band, and using Icicle Crash. I also needed my attack boosted by 1 stage. This is why it was super important that I was a brave nature. By getting just enough speed, I would be faster than Eternatus, but slower than Zacian. This meant Zacian could use Howl before I attacked, giving me the attack boost needed to one-shot Eternatus. Yes, it was a little bit luck involved because of the fact that I had to use Icicle Crash, but as you can see, I was lucky enough to get it on my first try. It was honestly amazing watching Eternatus' health go all the way down. It's the strongest Pokemon that's ever been in a game in terms of base stats, and something that had scared me from the beginning of this run. Especially when I'd seen that the damage calcs were off for some of my Pokemon when taking on the 3rd gym. It was super helpful to see that it didn't matter, and it did work out in the end, and that Darmanitan was able to one-shot as I had originally hoped. After catching one of the most powerful Pokemon in the Galar region that had been influential for all of its technology and advancements, I just threw it in the box, or it was just kind of stay forever, because I didn't really need it, and I was totally fine with that. But it's also funny that a 10-year-old has such great power. With that done, it's finally time for the championship battle, because clearly watching Pokemon battles is more important than the giant political corruption issues or any sort of thing that happened as a result of this whole scheme coming to light. But hey, I'm not complaining. It was my time to become the champion and finish the last required boss battle for the main story. And, I mean, it's easy. There's really no reason for me to care at this point. I know that I can comfortably one-shot every one of Leon's Pokemon using Darmanitan or some other strategy, and even if it's not very effective, like I said, Darmanitan is just too powerful. I do like that Leon's team is finally some sort of diverse aspects that we haven't really seen anywhere else in the game, but that's not enough to save him. He's still just way too low a level, and his Pokemon just don't have high enough defense to really stand a chance in any way, shape, or form. So to answer the main question, can you beat Pokemon Sword in terms of the main story without taking any damage? Other than the battle with Wooloo, the answer is yes. All of the battles are completely doable. I know I technically spoiled it since the run isn't quite over, but honestly, nothing at this point even can come close to doing any sort of damage to me, and showing this battle is more of a formality than anything. Honestly, I wish I could have just skipped over a lot of these battles, and even in the post-game you'll see there are a lot of battles that I'm including just for the sake of completion rather than I want to, so I'm forced to kind of ramble. But we've seen all the power that Leon gets as the champion of the Galar region, and suddenly that's just all being handed over to a 10-year-old with no sort of questioning behind the reasoning of it. Like, we saw Leon have very important say in a lot of political and social aspects of the region where he was working with the chairman, and now that's my job. I get to not only rebuild the Galar region from scratch, I get to make every major decision, which is just how it should be. A confused child rebuilding a region from scratch. Do I have any idea how to do any of these things? No. What do I know how to do? Win Pokemon battles. Is that somehow going to translate into great political skills? I mean, it kind of has to, I guess. I mean, yeah, I'm rambling, but yes, as you can see, the battle's coming to a close, and I've officially beaten the game without taking any damage. Asterisk. Screw Wooloo. Kicking things off in the post-game, we immediately have another battle with Hop. There's no story that I can talk about in the interim, and it's just going to be another case of stalling for time until the clip is done, so I can do it again for another clip. I'm trying to figure out the best way to handle the post-game, because there's all of the Dynamax fights, and honestly, I'm probably just going to skip all of those. The reason being is it's one Pokemon, and it's pretty much just a one-shot with Darmanitan for every single one. I think I used Bolthound once for the Water Gym and Gyarados for the Fire Gym. So if you're looking to see the clips of me one-shotting those, they're just too much time. The video is already fairly long, and I don't really want to add them and keep building up on time. I'm still not really sure how I feel about the fact that you catch Zacian after completing the main game. It makes the main story feel incomplete. Like, this is the first time I've had to beat the game, become the champion, and only then can I get the box legendary. To me, that's such a big part of the story. But it also makes sense given how they lead up to that moment, and I can't really see a good way of them having to integrate getting Zacian with everything that's going on that they've already tried to throw in. That being said, this is definitely the weirdest post-game I have ever seen in a Pokemon game. It really doesn't make sense to me why the plot is happening this way, or just like the motive behind these two strange characters and how they were secretly living in the Galar region for so long with no one being aware of their existence or what they really hope to do. It sounds like they're just trying to show that the two Pokemon are monsters, and somehow that'll convince everyone to worship them and follow them, when no one knew Zacian and Zamazenta existed, and they easily could have tried to regain their rule, but they didn't, and this whole thing is just kind of a mess, and it's kind of funny, and I like it in some ways, but it's just so unnecessary. The characters are really annoying, and it adds a bunch of unnecessary time to basically complete what feels like part 2 of the main story. I've already talked about this, and I'm going to immediately talk about it again. It's just, I don't know. I'm stalling once again, and I don't really have anything to say. I like their character designs and that they try and match the idea of sword and shield, and like, obviously you can see it in their hair and the items they take and the names they chose or are given, and it's just weirdly humorous and idiosyncratic, and like nothing else really I feel like has happened in any of the main series games. After saving a couple gyms, it was time for the next major battle of the post-game, and it was a double battle with Hop. Going into this battle, I was really scared because I knew there was no reliable way for me to knock out both opponents' Pokemon. I was going to be relying on Heat Wave, which doesn't have 100% accuracy, meaning at any point I could miss and end up forfeiting the whole fight. On top of that, they both had Pokemon that knew the move First Impression, so I was going to be having to use a turn of Protect to guarantee that I wasn't going to get hit. It was a little bit tricky, and I was definitely afraid of missing with Heat Wave on something and having to start over, but luckily I was able to get it on my first try. I had thought this fight was earlier in the run, and given that I didn't have Heat Wave on Arcanine at the time, I was afraid that I had potentially soft-locked myself because I wouldn't be able to take on both opposing Pokemon at once because I didn't have a spread move. Unfortunately, they never came up, and I never really saw them as necessary, and I managed obviously to get through the whole game without needing one until this point. If I were to do this run again, I definitely would want to grab an Earthquake user. I think there were a lot of times in double battles, particularly with Hop, where this would have come in handy. And also, Earthquake is just so strong and relevant that it almost makes sense not to use it in a run, and I'm surprised that none of my Pokemon actually had it. Next up, we're in Battle on Leo with a battle with Bead. Not gonna lie, I forgot that this battle even existed. So I had Darmanitan at the lead, just planning on waltzing in and one-shotting whatever Pokemon was Dynamaxed, and I ended up walking into a full fight. I spent the first about minute before the battle actually started Googling what his team was to make sure that I was able to one-shot it, and doing some damage calcs just in case they were relevant. Turns out they weren't, and once again it was a super clean sweep using both Haunter and Darmanitan, but it was nice to know that even in situations where I wasn't even expecting to have a battle, Darmanitan was able to carry me along with the rest of my team where I didn't really have to worry about things. I definitely shouldn't have been as lax as I was and not caring about certain things, but it was so late in the run, I was so over-leveled, and there really wasn't much room for anything to take me out, and I carried this attitude through the whole way. But anyway, we are now back at the last battle with Swordward for the game, and oh my goodness, I am so glad. And just like every other battle, there's really nothing interesting to say. Arcanine is just putting in work and sweeping through the whole team. I do find it kind of funny though that Arcanine can't actually beat Golisopod one-on-one with Flame Wheel, but because of the fact that she can get it below 50% health, an emergency exit will force Golisopod out, it's still not a problem. I'm going to use this time to talk about the next battle because it's kind of quick. It's going to be against Zamazenta, and is a battle I completely forgot about. Unfortunately, Darmanitan cannot one-shot Zamazenta, and because of the fact that I needed to be slower than Zacian to get the Howl boost, I'm also slower than Zamazenta. Which means that I had to backtrack to get the Choice Scarf, and also I had to hope that Icicle Crash was able to flinch in order to get the one-shot. But yeah, I did need to figure out and do some finagling after realizing I wasn't able to outspeed it. Well now, here's the battle that I just so eloquently talked about. And it's super quick, as you can see. We are almost halfway done with it, and that's why it didn't really make sense to talk about all the work I needed to do beforehand, because there was no way I could really finish in the quick length of this battle. Here I am, finally, at the last battle of the post-game against Hop. And honestly, I once again don't really have anything to say. We've already seen me beat his team, and the only difference now is he has Zamazenta. But you just saw me beat Zamazenta, and this time it's in its Dauntless Shield form, which means it's weak to Superpower. So I'm not going to really talk about the battle itself, but more use this time to talk about the run as a whole. It was definitely a lot of fun, and I learned a lot along the way. I do think it'd be really cool to try and do all of the championship battle rematches and do those damageless, but at this point, given how boring a lot of this game has been, I don't know if I would be able to do a commentary over it, but I think it'd be fun just to get that collection together and just throw it up with some fun, unlicensed music so I don't have to worry about any sort of fines. I also did include the battle with Marnie originally, but I think I'll throw that in part 2. I also think maybe as a fun challenge, it would be cool to do this in Pokemon Shield and not be able to use any of the Pokemon that I used in this playthrough. I think it would cause a strategy to be a lot different, and I think it would be a lot harder, and hopefully it would give me a lot more to say. Obviously, when battles are just straight one-shots and I'm filling time, that's not really the case, but I do think it would be cool, and I think also doing a part 2 of doing all of the post-game would be a lot of fun. The first expansion has already come out, but given how short it is, I don't really see it being worth the time to do something with that, but hopefully maybe the second part will be, and there could be maybe even a part 3 of this video. But for now, that concludes finding out if it's possible to beat Sword and Shield without taking damage, and the answer to that question is yes.